Tell everybody out there who doesn't know you or your music, what style of music do you play?
Everybody has to make a definition of what you do. So what's your genre? So we came up with one that really is pretty descriptive. It's chicken fried pre-war Hokum-Billy jug band music, which is just easy to remember, and we figured that's a good, it just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, hang on while I write that down. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Two Beers with a Band. I'm your host, Chris Schramm, and today I am sitting down with Bill Steber, and he is an interesting character, guys. I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed reading about this man, Bill, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll talk about the beers that you brought.
Okay,
and, we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been introduced as a character before, and I'll try to live up to that. I'm Bill Steber. I'm actually I'm from Tennessee, about fourth or fifth generation Tennessean. I think I had family here before it was a state, at least on my mom's side, down from Hickman County, Williamson County area, from the poor part of Williamson County.
Right.
And I've been a music fanatic ever since I have had memory. So almost everything I do revolves around music. There's a soundtrack in my head 24/7, whether I like it or not.
Yeah,
so my whole life is eat, live, and breathe music.
Right. I know the feeling. If there's not a song playing in my head, I'm apparently asleep.
Oh, I even have them at all. If I'm working on a song, like learning a new song or a song that I don't want in my head, it goes all night long. I'll wake up at 3 a.m. and there's that song. It's just rolling in my head all night long. So,
well, I think a part of that is the creative aspect of being a musician, a creator, someone who. A creative, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I guess maybe that is either a blessing or a curse.
Well, it depends, because most of the time the song that's rolling in my head is not always one that I want. It's like it's like I'm plagued by the perpetual earworm.
Right, right. I have the same thing. I wake up in the middle of the night with a song in my head, and I don't know the whole song.
Right.
So it's like maybe the first verse just repeats over.
Oh, yeah,
and over,
yeah.
And over and over. It's like, oh, God, what do I got to do to get rid of this? But let's go ahead.
One of the things you can do to get rid of it is try a beer.
Well, you know what? You happen to pick up a interesting beer. You picked up Buddy. It is a collab beer from Jackalope Brewing, and in collaboration with Hattie B's, a fairly well-known restaurant here in the Nashville.
Oh, yeah.
And this happens to be a golden ale. It is 5.2% ABV. It's 1 pint can. It's definitely got interesting can art. I will give it that.
Yeah, I like the disembodied heads on there. That's a nice vibe there. You got the I understand why, because you got the disembodied chicken head for Hattie B's and the disembodied jackalope head. So yeah.
Okay, I did not see that until now. I definitely that's interesting. I bet there's a story behind that.
Probably so, yeah. I like the colors and everything. And being a golden ale, what I'm guessing is that it's probably going to be designed to cool the heat from the shut the cluck up level of hot that they have at Hattie B's.
I like it. Yeah. I would have never put that together, but I definitely like it.
Because you want, that's why all the Mexican beers are that basically versions of the Pilsner there.
Yeah.
Because you want to take away the heat from properly prepared Mexican food. All right, so let's check out the color of this thing. All right.
All right.
Digging that.
Well, my pour was a little more aggressive.
Yeah, man, you got a nice little head on that one.
Yeah, yeah. I don't get to enjoy that one as soon as you get to enjoy yours, and that really sucks.
I had a friend of mine that was he was sitting in a pub in Ireland one time, and they ordered a Guinness. And the way the old guys over there, once they pour off the pint, they'll sit there and they'll wait until all of the foam is settled, so they can get the bartender will top it all the way off. And my friend, he already went to take a sip of it with the head on it, and the guy was like, "You must have a powerful thirst,"
Right.
Because he was like, any respectable Irishman or Scot is going to wait until that foam goes all the way down.
Well, there is a buddy of mine at the tap room where I met you.
Yeah.
He does the exact same thing. When they pour in his mug, they will sit it, they'll pour and they'll let it sit, and they'll go and do other things,
Right.
wait for the head to go away and top it off
Right.
before they hand it to him. Every single time. In the night I met you, actually,
Yeah.
before the bartender did a shift change, she walked by, and everybody who had the mug, she said, "Do you want me just to go ahead and top it off?" And I was like, "Sure."
Right,
and she
right.
said, "They got me trained."
Oh, right.
I was like, okay.
You can get a certificate at the Guinness factory in Dublin. Right before COVID, we were over in Ireland and we took the tour there, and at the very end of it, you take a class in how to properly pour a pint of Guinness, and you get your certificate at the end of the day.
Really?
Oh yeah. There's a whole technique of 45-degree angle to a certain point, and then you have to turn. I forget the exact thing. I did get my certification, but if you have to re-up every year, I'd probably lose it.
Right.
But that was a fascinating thing, and it's nothing like having a properly poured Guinness just mere feet away from where they make it, and it was the finest one I'd ever had, for sure.
Oh, I'm sure it's fresh, and just without question, especially a stout beer, as fresh as you can get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it hadn't sat in a can, and just, with me, any type of dark brown beer, stouts, porters, anything like that, or anything that's barreled, I have to sit. I want to pour it and let it open up. I almost treat a beer like that like wine or bourbon.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's just me. I tend to get better flavor when I do that. But this beer right here has a foamy wide head.
Yeah.
It has fast rising bubbles. It's gold in color, which is good, but it's pretty clear.
What's funny, mine's cloudier, and I wonder if that comes down, if it's the lighting or if it's the pour technique. I don't know but mine's just ever so slightly cloudier than yours.
Well, mine may be a little more clear because I punished it when I put it in the glass. So,
well,
that could be part of it, but either way, that is a really pretty beer.
That is. That's it lives up to the name. It is the most golden of golden ales I think I have ever seen. So,
well,
you wanna try it?
Yeah,
all
let's
right.
get a sniff. Cheers.
All right. Okay. A little fruity on the top for me. A little flowery.
A little smooth. It's a little sweeter.
Yeah, and then it gets a little sweeter. No bitterness at all. Oh, there was a little bit right there, just on the back end. I'm just getting a little kind of ESB kind of notes there, like just ever so slightly.
Yeah, but it's not enough to overpower the malts and the other flavors. It's just enough to kind of clean it up a little bit and let you know you're drinking a beer.
Right.
So
I like it. It's actually, it has it's a little more buttery than I was expecting, because when you think of, golden ale, I guess, as opposed to just a Pilsner. Now, I'm not an expert on all the various brewing techniques and what goes into it, but it's got a little more body than I thought it was going to have.
Well, that is definitely a good thing.
It's funny that on the second sip, it wasn't quite as flowery and sweet. It's got a little more interesting bitter notes for me on the second taste.
It does seem like the bitterness comes in a little bit sooner.
Yeah.
And maybe stays just a touch longer.
Right, yeah.
And I think maybe that could have something to do with the fact that, one, your palate's kind of already set on what to expect.
Right.
But the beer is getting a little more air to it.
Yep.
And that's one thing I like about craft beer. If you take a beer and you kind of have a conversation like what we're doing,
right,
and kind of let it open up, it'll show you a little bit more complexity. A good craft beer will show you a little more complexity and maybe even a couple of different tastes in there. And that, to me, that makes a good beer better.
Absolutely. I like something that's interesting rather than just completely predictable.
Yeah. And just, this is a beer you can enjoy and you can talk about, as opposed to a beer you just sit there and slam.
Right. Yeah.
Crunch the can and go grab another one,
Natty Light.
Right. Not domestic beers, no.
All right. Well, that's already, my shoulders are already lowering a little bit, getting a little more relaxed.
Right.
One more sip here.
Right.
I think we'll be ready to roll.
All right. Well, what do you got going right now? What are you into? What's going on?
Oh my gosh. Well, last year was insanely busy, and I was looking forward to a little more downtime this year, but of course it's already kind of cranking up. We've got in the main band that I'm in is a band called the Jake Leg Stompers, and this year will be our 20th year. Together. And we were doing, I don't know, maybe 50 gigs a year for the pandemic, before the pandemic, and really only one of us was even just only a musician. The rest of us have other things. So that was pretty busy. And then, of course, things fell off after that, but it's starting to pick back up again. Our drummer, Horatio Algernon Whiplash, otherwise known as Noisy, a.k.a. Sam Rorix, he has retired from his sales job, so he is booking us every place he can get us, in all kinds of variations. We've got the main Jake Leg Stompers, and then Lisa Law. She's She's actually Leela Mae Smith in the band, her nom de jug. She's got several bands. So there's within that band, there's about 3 or 4 variations. The Lisa Law Trio. She's got Lisa Law and the Suspects. Me and the bass player and the Stompers have a band called the Hoodoo Men.
Yeah.
And we put out a record, working on a second one. So that's the thing about, working as a musician, and especially in the Nashville area. You got to have a bunch of different side projects and hustles, and in other words, to match the budget.
Right.
If there's $1,000, then we can bring the whole band and do our own sound. It's a $150 gig. Well, maybe a couple of us or 3 of us at the most can do it. So, but we've got repertoire and people for each of those. Whatever fits the appropriate. Venue. Like when you saw us, that was half of us, and that was Lisa's gig, and we were doing a 3-piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't. Well, I was so. What's the word I'm looking for? I was not expecting that style of music.
Right.
And I came over there and I sat there and I was like, okay, I see what they're doing. I see the genre. I appreciate it. And, it's a genre that I've gotten into. Several years ago, I kind of took a deep dive into it. So I really appreciated it. And y'all were just killing it.
Oh,
I mean, I was just, the volume. The volume was good.
Good, yeah.
And
we're not about, the Marshall stacks and trying to blow people away. We want to have a comfortable volume to fit the space.
Yeah.
People to be able to have a conversation. Hopefully not too loud right in front of the band, but we understand you're in a public place, and
Right.
not everybody's coming out just to hear you. So
Well, one thing I appreciated about you guys is the volume wasn't overly. It wasn't too high,
Yeah.
but also I could hear the individual instruments and the vocals, and you could kind of sit there and almost block out certain things. But I've been to see many shows where you'll have a bass player that's turned up too high because the vocalist just can't. They can go in a studio and make it happen, but live on stage, they're not quite there yet.
Right.
So they got to turn something up to kind of drown him or her out just a touch. Or, the guitar, maybe he's not quite there yet, so they'll turn something up, or they'll turn the guitar up because maybe the bass player can't stay in time. But you guys seem to kind of everything flowed and didn't need.
We've been at it a while. We know kind of each other, how to listen for each other too. Because that's like I said, the band's been around 20 years, and Sam, the drummer who was running the sound, he's pretty much an OG member of the band now. Lisa's only been with us half the time. She's only been with us about 10 years, so she's one of the newcomers in the group.
Right.
But we're so lucky to have her. She's a world-class singer. We're just, I just always joke with her. Thank God she doesn't know how good she is, or she'd never play with us. She truly is a world-class singer.
Well, tell everybody out there who doesn't know you or your music, what style of music do you play, and how did you come about that style of music? And I know you're in different bands, but the albums I've listened to, the songs I've listened to, they do kind of, to me, it seems like everything can be thrown in the same basket, and that's just me being on the outside.
Right.
I'm in the middle of it like you are, but to me, I can listen to your different bands, and I can say, you know what, all that fits together.
Yeah, no, it's true. It is true. So the band, Jake Leg Stompers, we started, like I said, 20 years ago, and when everybody has to make a definition of what you do. And so, what's your genre? So we came up with one that really is pretty descriptive. It's chicken fried pre-war Hokum-Billy jug band music, which is just easy to remember, and we figured that's a good. Everybody just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, hang on while I write that down.
Actually, what it basically means is that we just play just any music we want to, generally with a cutoff around 1945. So almost everything we do is from the mid-20s through the mid-30s, which is, to me, the sweet spot for the greatest music that was ever recorded in America. And the reason is because the first professional recordings came out in the 1890s on cylinder, and that was the dominant form for about 10 years. And then eventually there was the platters started coming in, the Edison discs and 78s. But in those first really more than 20 years, the record industry was kind of the lowest common denominator music. Barbershop quartets, a lot of Irish tenors, Caruso, light opera, a lot of popular music. Pretty straight stuff. The real interesting stuff didn't get recorded until well up into the 1910s. The first jazz record around 1917, the first real blues record around 1920, and these were just some of the first forays into really branching out for the industry. And so by 1925, almost all the famous singers of the day were already affiliated with the big companies, Victor and Columbia, and so that some of the smaller labels that were trying to break in, they had to find their own market. So they were like, what's an untapped market? So they started, like labels like Paramount and Jeanette, they started looking at what they called race records and hillbilly records. Those were the two, genres that were roughly affiliated with, working class white culture, working class black culture. And that's when the good stuff started getting recorded. And they found that, oh my gosh, there's a market for that. So starting in the mid-1920s, that's when what we think about as the old school blues first got recorded. All the hillbilly bands that were the old-time music that was the precursors to country and bluegrass and all of that stuff. So in other words, not professional, but important musicians that were exemplars of their community finally started getting recorded. And because they never had gotten recorded before, every little community had their own style, their own bands. Like the fiddle players in Mississippi were very different than the ones from North Georgia. They had a little more looser, snakier style. And so that first 10 years, the record companies didn't know what the hell they were doing. They would just record anything and everything, like throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sold. But by doing so, they actually were preserving all these various styles and genres and community sounds from all around the country and all around the South until they figured out what sold. And then starting in the 30s, especially after the Depression, it started getting really, really, kind of commodified, and, it all started sounding more the same, more like what we have now, like bro country in Nashville, all that kind of thing. But that golden period from the mid-20s through the early 30s, and that's what we focus on because there's so much just phenomenal music that a lot of people don't know. I had somebody come up after a gig one time and gave us a great compliment. They said, look, I love everything y'all did. I don't think I knew a single song that y'all played, but I feel like I knew all of it. And that's because everything that you're familiar with, this is the roots of it. This is the building blocks to everything that came afterwards. So that's kind of what we focus on. And also the other thing is that we want to do something that's really fun. So we kind of focus on the jug band music, a little ragtime, some novelty tunes, some hardcore blues, some of the stuff that has, I guess this was the music that your great-grandparents told your grandparents not to listen to. This was the rude music, the punk music, the rock and roll of the period, the music for meat barrel types, as some of these blues singers were called.
Right. Well, what I've heard, to me, it's kind of, and this is just me looking from the outside in, I do kind of see it as roots blues to me. Yeah. And since I'm a fan of blues music, that it does kind of have that, it has that throwback pure sound. Yeah. Like some of the vinyl that, I've found over the years in various places in various shapes. Right. But you put it on and you listen to the recording and it's like, what, this is pure. Yeah. You hear the little mistakes in the background.
That's so important.
Because, this isn't edited down so much.
They couldn't edit.
Right.
It was cut directly to the metal lathe.
Right.
That's what you got. It's what you got. There ain't no overdubs.
And that's what I like about that style of music. You hear in the back, or it sounds like you hear the flaws.
Yes.
And
the humanity.
Right.
What made Marilyn Monroe one of the most beautiful women in the world. Of course, she was gorgeous and had a great body and hair and all that. But, the beauty mark. Right. That flaw, that one flaw that keeps it from becoming just a completely synthetic thing that makes it relatable. Right. I love that kind of stuff. I love hearing the human element in music, and especially in that old music, because half of those guys, probably because they just sounded drunk. Like if you listen to old Skillet Lickers records, a great hillbilly band from North Georgia, my God, they were having a great time, and they were probably high as kites. Right. The whole time they were recording. And there's just such a joyful abandon. And that was one of our mission statements, because we're living in Nashville area. This is per capita probably the greatest musicians in the entire world. I mean, like you walk into Kroger, It's like, oh, well, hey, there's Sam Bush right there. He's only the top 3 best mandolin players in the entire world. Chris Thiele, all these guys. Stuart Duncan on fiddle. I mean, these are like the world-class people. And for most folks, you're not going to compete against that. There's just such amazing musicianship in this town. But sometimes, especially on the Music Row side, it's a little tight. It's not always fun.
Yeah.
It's so precise, and especially with the production standards today. And I thought, the one thing they don't have enough of is a bunch of drunk hillbillies playing old music.
Well, I know I'm born and raised in Nashville. I've been, around music my entire life, all forms of music. And some of the radio stations I listen to, the main radio station I listen to, they do a lot of, they put on a lot of shows, promote a lot of shows, and they'll go and record the entire show from start to finish. And, and as you know, musicians will get up there, the singer will tell a joke, or they'll introduce somebody while they're swapping instruments, whatever. And one thing I've noticed is a lot of musicians will say, we're here in Nashville and we gotta really step up, because we're not playing to just any audience. Right. We're playing to an audience of professionals, right. And we have to entertain and impress this audience more than, if we're in some little podunk town in, Montana or Nevada or even California. It's
a tough town. People in this town have a very high standard of what they expect, and also, frankly, they're just spoiled as hell. It takes a lot to impress a Nashville audience. I always say that sometimes it's one of the best places to play if you really want to hone your craft, because there's a kind of practiced indifference to a lot of the clubs around here.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you're doing that? Okay, I've heard that before. I've heard people do that better. So, I mean, you got to bring something unique. You got to bring your A game. And so, and our way of creating a niche was just like, let's just kind of focus on this particular time period and this ethos that is not as common. See, we started out, we did a lot of old time music, but as well as the jug band stuff and the hillbilly music and blues and everything. But at the time, this was at the rise of Old Crow Medicine Show was coming up around the same time, and
right.
Hackensaw Mountain Boys and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh man, those are great, old time hillbilly bands. So over the years, we really kind of gravitated more toward Mississippi Delta, Memphis, more of the African American based vernacular music of the pre-war era, and of course with Lisa being our main lead singer, she was raised up in the black church in North Florida, and she can bring that diva essence of the 1920s, the Bessie Smith and Trixie Smith and Ma Rainey and all of that, even a little bit of Ella Fitzgerald. She brings in that jazz element, and nobody can touch her when it comes to that. So that's what we've kind of gravitated toward, because we're kind of unique in this market for that.
Well, it seems what little I heard live, that y'all sound a lot like the recordings I've heard.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a great compliment, because we love the spirit of those old records, man, and that's what it's all about.
And that's one thing that really drew me into, sitting down over there where I sat and I was just eating it up. And right. I wish I'd been in there much sooner. But either way, y'all have a unique sound, especially for this town.
Right.
And
yeah.
I can appreciate that, and I enjoy that, and I hope that everyone who listens to this, if they don't know who you guys are, they'll pick something up somewhere. I mean, you have plenty of stuff out there.
Yeah, and a lot of it's streaming. Thing is that we've released 4 albums over the years, and pretty much sold out of the physical copies of all of them, with just a handful left of each one, which has been great. But now we're like, do you get them reprinted? Are people going to buy 1,000 CDs? At this point, cars don't even have CD players in them anymore, so that's a dilemma now. And the thing is, well, what about vinyl? The kids love vinyl. You know how much it costs to produce a vinyl record? Holy cow.
I don't know how much it costs, but the main vinyl producer, I guess in town, is in my territory where I work. So
off Nolensville Road.
Back in
United.
Yeah. We I have toured that structure many, many times at odd hours. Fire alarms, various alarms, and just seeing the production facility, and that's just to produce the actual album. That's not to, they got all these little rooms, separate rooms, and it just, to me, you look at that facility and it's like there is big money here.
Oh, yeah. And what's so great about them is that, of course, they have massive orders from, the major labels. They've got a new record coming out, Casey Musgraves or Taylor Swift or whatever, and they're going to need a gazillion copies. But, if you're a little independent like us, we did the Hoodoo Men. After we put it out on CD, I'm like, let's try this out. Let's just do some vinyl. And I did a vinyl through them, and it turned out great. I'm so glad we did it. We'll never make a dime on it because the
overhead.
The overhead is just but I'm like, that's one of those things. It's like when I die, there will be some vinyl records that outlive me with something that songs I wrote and records that we produce. So, it's kind of validation for having lived on this planet to have something to leave. We left some vinyl, man. That's a good thing.
Well, vinyl is the new. The new thing, and that's what everybody's trying to get out on vinyl. But I think y'all sound, the way y'all do music, if you put that on vinyl and you got that little crack from the vinyl and you got that, y'all sound, to me, I would rather hear it on vinyl than I would streaming or CD. Not to say I don't enjoy what I've heard.
Oh, yeah.
Just if you get that little crack in the back, because
it's that warmth, that's what you want.
Yeah,
you want that humanity. You want that. There's something, an emotional response from that needle bouncing between those grooves and coming the electricity through the speakers that is just not the same as an MP3 file. There's just I don't know. It may be very subtle, and it may be even a completely placebo effect. But you just feel the sound waves differently.
Like you were saying about the sound waves, to me, the music that I hear when I listen to you, the genre I put that music in, I have heard those singers recorded on vinyl, and you hear the crack in the back. You hear the airiness of the studio or the room or, wherever they actually did the recording. Sometimes it sounds like the vocalist is way off the mic. Maybe there's one mic in the room and everybody's playing to that. Or, maybe it's the vocalist just, they kind of move around. So you get the back and forth. And like you said, you get the humanness in behind it. And I think y'all sound on vinyl would put me back.
Right.
Mindset.
Well, we've been talking about doing it's so funny. In our first few years, after we were together a year, we put out a CD. And then the next year we put out another CD. And then 2 or 3 years go by and we put out our third CD. And then another 5 or 6 years go by, and then we had a lineup change, and we put out our fourth CD, the only one that we have with our current singer, Lisa. And then that's been 10 years. So our 4 records were in our first 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's time. We're way overdue for another one. And I've loved the places that we've recorded. Our third record was at Jimbo Mathis's studio in Como, Mississippi. Jimbo Mathis is he was the founder of the Squirrel Nut Zippers. They were part of that wave of the hot jazz of the 1990s. They had that one big hit called Hell. In the Afterlife.
Yeah.
And he still runs that band, but all of his other stuff. I just love his aesthetic, because what we wanted was kind of a North Mississippi hill country version of kind of a mid-'70s Rolling Stones kind of thing, and he was the perfect producer for that. Something like an Exile on Main Street for jug band music. And so on that record, my God, we had Sharday Thomas and the Rising Star Fife and Drum Band, part of that North Mississippi hill country tradition of African American fife and drum that goes back to at least the 1700s. In this country, we had Reverend John Wilkins on that record, who was the son of Robert Wilkins, one of the great pre-war blues singers. And that was, I think, some of the first recordings he had made in over 40 years. And then, of course, he went on to relaunch his career. Unfortunately, he passed away of COVID in 2020. But he was an incredible inspiration. And also we had Luther Dickinson from the North Mississippi All-Stars on that record, doing a couple of tunes, because he's an old friend of ours. I'm really proud of that record. It was just such an event record, almost like a Nitty Gritty Dirt Brand, Circle Being Broken. In fact, that was kind of one of our models for that. It was just more like, let's bring all these interesting people together. Some of them, deeply steeped in the Mississippi music tradition, and just let's get us all together in a room and see what happens.
What was the name of that record, and how many tracks are on it?
Well, Hill Country Hoodoo is the name of the record, and oh gosh, how many tracks? Somewhere between 12 and 17. I don't know, closer to 16 or 17.
Okay.
And it's incredible variety of stuff on there.
So
yeah,
that is a must get for someone who enjoys your style of music.
Absolutely,
or wants to hear you and kind of where you come from. Album. So
yeah, and there was some unique stuff on there, like for instance, kind of mixing the traditions up. Like for instance, I'm also primarily kind of known not only just as a musician, but as a field researcher in primarily Mississippi blues. I've been going down to the state of Mississippi, mostly in the Delta, for this will be 32 years this year.
Okay.
And one of the things I did in the late 90s was seek out the last living black railroad workers that were still working when they were doing lining track songs. So in other words, these are the work chants that were the precursor to blues. So some of the oldest music forms in the country. And I found about a dozen guys, and then I got verses from 3 or 4 of them. So in other words, for railroad workers back in the day, before they had the machines to line track, and by say lining track, so in other words, they lay the track on a bed, and then they might have a washout, and then the track gets a bend in it, so they have to fix that so the train doesn't derail running at full speed. So what they used to have to do is they'd get these lining track gangs, 6-8 guys with these big, long metal poles, and they would have these songs, and they would time exactly when they all hit at the same time. And they might scooch the rail over like a 1/4 of an inch, and they might have to move it 2 feet. So it takes a little while for them to ease it back. And these songs were so important for that work, so everybody could time the force of the hit at the exact same second. So I recorded these guys doing these songs, and then I thought, well, let's bring some of these back to life. And then I suddenly got this inspiration of bringing the North Mississippi fife and drum music in, and instead of just doing it a cappella, we had the fife and drum music in the background. So it's the first time that the railroad work chant mixing with the fife and drum both of which were precursors to the blues for the first time coming together. And so, I was leading the track calling, and everybody was singing and the fife and drum playing. And it was, I just got chills from just how amazing that it was.
That really sounds interesting.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've enjoyed about this interview so far is the history of it. And I love history. The older I've gotten, the more I enjoy history, and especially the history of music, the history of, the history of Nashville and what Nashville was before music, and how music became so big, and how Nashville actually became Music City. And I've had to go to the library and read original documents when I can find them.
Right.
All kinds of, I've dug deep into it, and the history of music in general, to me, is interesting, and especially the style of music you play, you sing, you write, and the collabs you've done. That to me is very unique, because I'm a fan of history, and I think anyone who listens to this, anyone who maybe is the unbelievably amount, the variation of blues.
Right.
You can look up the different styles of blues and everything. If someone wanted to do a deep dive and see where these sounds came from, where their favorite artist, who inspired them, and who inspired the person that inspired them, and just, if someone wanted to go all the way back and see where music actually started. That's what I enjoy about your style of music, is that it's a new version of the pure sound.
Yeah. And you mentioned blues and specifically, and it is largely the building block for everything that came afterwards. So the blues, first emerged. It's really, it's a lot like human ingenuity in general. So there's like, when you really go back into history, you'll find that major innovations in history, inventions, will pop up around the globe around the same time. So as human society and culture evolves, the next logical thing for a new tool, how to turn ore into metal. Well, it's places that didn't have, Europe and South America and places like that figured out how to do that in, similar timelines. Well, the music is also like that. Even with blues, there's not a single source for that of origin. It sort of popped up in Texas, in Mississippi, in Alabama, and Georgia, all around a similar time, because everything that was before that was kind of pushing it in that direction. And then from that, of course, you had the blues really become popular in 1920, blues and jazz almost really kind of simultaneously. And that leads to, of course, jazz turns into swing, and that turns into bebop, and that turns into free jazz, and blues, eventually turns into jump blues. And, Kansas City and Louis Jordan doing a really kind of a proto rock and roll thing, Big Joe Turner in Kansas City. And then it's just a short leap from that to the early rock and roll. Chuck Berry, Bill Haley and the Bill Haley and the Comets, right? Yeah, it's First Day with a New Mouth,
right?
Basically just he was just a kind of a white hillbilly swing version of what Big Joe Turner was doing with the jump blues and Arthur Prysock and all those guys, and then Muddy Waters, of course, taking that hardcore, Delta blues, moving to Chicago, and just doing the traditional music on the electric guitar. And all these homesick people up in Chicago, mostly from Mississippi, that went up in the Great Migration, they're like, not only does this remind me of home, but there's this sort of like gritty urgency with the new way it's being recorded that speaks to my life living, trying to hustle in Chicago.
Right.
And then, Rolling Stones and all those guys hear this stuff and they're like, my God, this is the good stuff. And they were, the Beatles and the Stones were just trying to be, black blues and R&B musicians, and it just came out through this English filter. And then all the teenagers here were like, holy crap, that's something new.
Well, I've heard different bands do the Rolling Stones, the Beatles music, but they put their own. We're in a club, I'm at a show, whatever, and that everybody gets excited. The band gets excited, or maybe it was even planned. It was probably planned. I'm sure it was planned, but for me, it was exciting. It came out of the blue. They're like, "Hey, why don't we do such and such song by the Beatles?" Or, "Hey guys, we got this one song. We want to do this," and they jump into it. Maybe the younger crowd doesn't know it's a Beatles song or a Rolling Stones song,
right?
But that band, they put their own twist on it,
right?
Because they got to kind of. Well, they don't have to. They do it their way.
Right. Yeah.
And you take, especially the Rolling Stones, which they have a unique sound to begin with.
Well, sure. They're a bunch of poor English boys that were just trying to sound like, black Southerners, and then of course it all just comes back and forth. That's the great thing about music, is that it's really a conversation, like food and music and so many other things are about borrowing or just outright theft of trying to become, trying to do something that you find is interesting. One of my great examples. There's a great Tom Waits quote. Who's one of my all-time favorite artists, who himself borrowed heavily from Kurt Weill and from Captain Beefheart and from Howlin' Wolf and from all these disparate sources to come out with this uniquely American music. He talks about Howlin' Wolf in particular, who Sam Phillips regarded as his single greatest discovery, way beyond Elvis. I mean, Elvis was great, but when in the end, Sam Phillips was like, I can die happy knowing that I got to record Howlin' Wolf before anybody else did. So what was Howlin' Wolf doing? He was coming up West Point, Mississippi, doing, grew up steeped in the early blues, knew Charlie Patton and some of that really hard-driving great stuff from the Delta. But he also loved Tommy Johnson. And Tommy Johnson was heavily influenced by Jimmy Rogers. Jimmy Rogers was basically a white yodeler doing blues that he heard from the railroad workers that he worked with. So he's doing this yodeling thing. Tommy Johnson, great blues musician from central Mississippi, I think was partly influenced by Jimmy Rogers, and he used to do this sort of like, this little yodel thing that he would do. I asked for water and she gave me gasoline. And so Wolf was like, oh man, I want some of that. I want to do that little yodel. But Wolf couldn't yodel, man. He was a 300-pound man. So it was like, oh. So that Howlin' Wolf howl was him just trying to be Tommy Johnson. And as Tom Waits says, that attempt to do something that he couldn't do in his approximation of it, that failure becomes his art. So that became his signature style, is trying to do this other thing that he couldn't do. So he just did something different, and in many ways it was better.
And it worked for him.
It worked for him. And that's how all of this stuff evolves. That's like we talk about the OG sources for all this music. Well, that always just goes back to the first one who got to record. So, your Charlie Pattons and all of these guys, some of the earliest guys that got to record in the mid-20s, we don't know necessarily what the people that they were, quote, borrowing/stealing from, sounded like, because we don't have records of that. And that's the thing, people get so butthurt about, appropriation and originality, and it's like it's never been it wasn't a priority for people who created all this music. Pete Seeger was like, there's no such thing as plagiarism in folk music. It's just everybody is constantly listening to everybody else, and it just seeps into what you're doing, and it comes out through you, comes out through the filter of your experience and what your voice sounds like and what you're able to do, and it's going to be unique. And I think that's a beautiful thing. You know, that's one of the things I don't worry about necessarily when we're playing this old music. I don't care if it sounds like the old records. I want it to have the spirit of those records. I want that feeling that I feel when I'm listening to this stuff and I see myself as more of a conduit across space and time to a modern day audience that can say, yeah, we're a lot of fun, man. We're a fun band, but listen to us. Yeah, great. Also, then go get the old records, man. Listen to what we're inspired by. You know, I'm honoring those guys.
So who inspires you to do what you do, to get up on stage, to write, to spend the time, I guess, what am I trying to say? To produce the art that you produce. Who inspires you and makes, who do you, I'm not going to say who do you model yourself after, because I don't think that's fair.
Right.
To ask an artist, who are you like?
No, in other words, if I was Howlin' Wolf, who am I trying to be? Who's my Tommy Johnson?
Yeah. But you're your own person,
right?
But somebody inspired you to pick up an instrument, to sit in front of a microphone, to grab a pen and paper when something hits you, and say, this is what I'm going to do. Who inspired you to be you?
Wow. How much time do you got?
I think we got a few more minutes, okay. But even if we cut
I can get into specific people, but I would say by the time, the person that probably inspired me most to actually want to play music were some of the, folkies, particularly, especially Neil Young. Okay. I discovered Neil Young when I was in high school, and really kind of first, a lot of it was the electric stuff, the Crazy Horse stuff. And then I go kind of back, and I started out, my first instrument was really the harmonica. So I was just kind of aping a lot of Neil Young, and I could mark him almost exactly, especially what they call first position harp, where you're playing the melody rather than off the draw notes, which is a more blues style, and Bob Dylan. And I didn't play the guitar or anything, so I tried to find people to play with, and I was like, what the hell with that? I just need to get a guitar and learn enough chords to where I can accompany myself, because I saw myself primarily as a harmonica player. And then it just, of course, goes from there, and everything inspires me. But the main thing I would say that inspires the band and what our mission is in all the bands that I play in is the recognition that music in its primary source is social music. It's not commercial music. And I think I was talking with a friend of mine the other day who was kind of bemoaning the fact that it's so impossible to make a good living as just a working musician, and how tough it is and all that. And I'm like, yeah, that is true. But you don't get down on yourself for that. In other words, you don't say, like, because I don't sell records like Taylor Swift and I'm a failure. No, that is a capitalist notion that has been placed on us to where all art is only valued in this country by its earning potential. If you think about the original purposes for music as a human enterprise, it was always for either religious or ritualistic purposes or for community cohesion. And if you just focus on that, you won't get too far in the weeds of comparing yourself against the people who make the big bucks, because the record industry survives on a 1% success rate. There's a 99% failure rate in the music industry, and it's those handful of guys that and gals especially, because it's a lot of times the women that are driving this, that make so much money it allows the record labels to try out a whole bunch of other things because they don't know what's going to work. That's right. The one beautiful thing about it is That's what I fear with AI coming up, is that they'll get those formulas, even those money making formulas will just be dialed in, but there's always some teenager out there playing an actual instrument or coming up with a beat that's going to hit a nerve for that generation, that's always going to regenerate the next thing.
Well, I agree with that 100%, because I've noticed that I've gone to beer events in Nashville where it's strictly it's a tasting. The brewers, they come down from various parts of the Southeast, and they have a big event, and everybody's bringing their new beer out, everybody's doing this. But in Nashville, you have a stage set up, and they'll bring in 2 or 3 bands, just kind of, I would assume, just to be kind of background
Right.
for the event.
Sure.
But what I've noticed and what I love about these events, and why I will go to every one of them, is because the bands will get up and they will play. And what I've noticed is they may have 3 or 4 different bands that are completely different from each other. And they're bands that, they got albums out there, they're recorded, they're possibly signed, but, they'll get up there and they will play their hearts out.
Yeah.
And as the event goes on, and the crowd starts getting a little beer in them, this and that, all of a sudden, towards the end of the event, you have more people standing up in front of the stage concerned about the musicians, the song, the art, and you can feel that energy from the stage. They're like, now I'm not just playing background, I'm playing for a crowd. And you feel the energy in the crowd. Everybody, there's a cohesiveness.
Yeah, there's a symbiotic relationship if music is going to be truly great. And all you got to do is just listen to some of the great live records. Etta James in Nashville, James Brown and Live at the Apollo, one of the greatest records in the world. And there's several B.B. King records that what makes the records great is not only that they were all musical geniuses with just incredibly crackerjack bands that were just tight as could be, but it's the electricity that's happening in the audience and that feedback loop, that the audience is just absolutely tingling with delight at what's happening on the stage, which feeds back to the performer. And even though, man, it would just be so amazing to have been there live, and there's no way that you can fully get that on vinyl, but my God, some of those great live records are just I just get my hair standing up at the back of my neck just thinking about some of those phenomenal live records. And that's something that's why live music really I don't think it will ever die. That's the reason the robots will not win everything, Right.
Well, I hope live music never dies, because it's I enjoy that more than I enjoy anything else. To me, and I have discovered some of my favorite artists by going to a venue that I wanted, and this happens to everybody. I go to a venue because an artist I want to see is playing.
Right.
And that artist may have 2 bands that open up for them.
Right.
Maybe I've heard of one of them. Maybe I haven't heard of either one of them. And, I go because for me, it's like, you know what? I bet I might really, really like this artist. And because if somebody said these 2 people or these 2 bands are going to open for this person, there's got to be a likeness.
Right.
And a guy that I really, really enjoy listening to, I had never heard of, and he opened for a musician that I wanted to see at the Ryman.
Yeah.
And
can you tell me who those were?
Kingfish Ingram.
Oh, Kingfish was opening.
He was opening for. Oh, I wish you wouldn't have asked me this. Gary Clark Jr.
Oh, okay.
Gary
yeah,
Clark
Gary
Jr.
Clark Jr.
Huge fan.
That was not a wise move on Gary Clark Jr.'s part.
Well, I'm going to say somebody walked away.
Yeah.
Got in the car on the way home,
Yeah.
plugged in the phone, and was listening to Kingfish all the way to the house.
Yeah. First time I saw Kingfish, he was 14 years old, playing at a little juke joint in Clarksdale, Mississippi called Red's. And, we need to open another beer because I need to pour one out for Red because
you know what? Let's
Red Padden was the last of the great juke joint runners or whatever you would call it in Clarksdale, and we just lost him this last month, and he was a dear friend, and that's the first time I saw Kingfish is when he was a teenager playing at Reds, and he is a prodigy and a product of the Clarksdale, the Mississippi Delta, and I've got to, I don't know him super well, but I've done some photo shoots with him, oh my God, what a beautiful human being he is, and just incredible talent.
He really was, man. And I'm going to say, and this is a pet peeve of mine, live music soundboards or sounds where it seems like the board is set for the main act.
Yeah.
And they just kind of do the sound check there and then let it go.
Right. Yeah.
And the first two acts got to kind of figure their way through it or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
And I'm going to tell you, his vocals, as far as what I heard that night, were not on point.
Right.
But what I saw him doing, leaning into that mic, squeezing every ounce of everything
He's a real deal. He's a real deal.
But his guitar was just, I mean, it was on point. It was out there. It was kind of overwhelming everything else. And I was like, oh, my God.
Yeah, he's special.
Who is this?
He's special.
And why is every hair on my body sticking straight up?
Yeah, he's special. All right, so what you got here?
Speaking of special, I hope this one is.
Okay.
This is a Czech lager from Yazoo Brewing here in Nashville. This is a 4.0 ABV beer that I think we just need to jump into this.
Yeah.
It's got a pretty label. I'm a fan.
It looks like it probably is an approximation of Prague, I'm guessing, in the background. Looks like there's like I can see, there. I think there's it looks like there's the River Charles and the bridge over the River Charles with a couple of the. I've been to Prague, so I kind of recognize
that
it.
now.
Yeah, there's some of the saints there. You know, an interesting thing I found out when I was there, they have all these saints and all these various characters on the bridge there over the River Charles, and some of them became sainted by the fact that they were martyred by being tossed into the River Charles.
Okay.
It's a pretty intense place. It's like the New Orleans of Europe.
Yeah, let's hope we don't get tossed in the river. Let's just go ahead and enjoy this beer.
Okay.
And,
so similar color.
All right. Wow, boy, just pouring this beer in the glass. The aromas.
Yeah, mine's a little clearer.
Yeah. And again, me and the violent pour, I got a little more head on mine than you did, but this is a very clear, beautiful.
Yeah.
Straw.
Yeah, you can almost read a newspaper through it.
Yeah, it's fast rising bubbles. It has a consistent head. It's kind of rocky. It's that's a real pretty beer.
All right,
let's dive in. Cheers.
Contrast.
Yeah, it is. That's interesting. That has a initially the first flavor that hit me is going to be the the malt flavor, but it's kind of muted and dialed back a little bit. It's not real sweet.
No.
And that's what I enjoy about this so far, is that a lot of times the malt flavor in a beer is going to be a little sweeter, and it's going to be a contrast to the hops. But this kind of seems like it flows and works with the hops.
Yeah, it doesn't have as many of the kind of the sweetest and the floral notes on the front end. It's more neutral to slightly, ever so slightly bitter, like a good European style, Pilsner, which is interesting too, because when we were driving on a gig between, I was playing with some friends of mine in Berlin, and that was a preliminary thing. We had some gigs there, and one of the single biggest gig I've ever done in my entire life was playing with a buddy of mine who's from Mississippi but lives in Tokyo, Ramblin' Steve Gardner, and he was opening up the blues festival in Vienna, Austria.
Oh wow!
It was a month-long festival, and we were the very first act on the very first day of the very first weekend.
Wow!
And a lot of pressure there. We played in the symphony hall there, and it was standing room only. So this is like where the Viennese Symphony Orchestra plays, okay? And I've got a banjo ukulele and a kazoo and a harmonica rack and a resonator guitar and a saw, and I'm like, this is the most back alley, humble instruments there possibly could be. And I'm sitting on the main stage at the Stadthalle in Vienna, Austria. This is like the home of Mozart and Strauss.
Yeah,
singing Memphis Jug Band tunes on a 1928 Mauna Loa banjo ukulele, right?
Well,
so,
I know you play multiple instruments, but I believe probably the most unique, and for the listeners, I'm sure, who may or may not even listen to this style of music, explain to me and the listeners, how do you play a saw?
It is you basically defying the laws of nature and working with it.
What kind of saw in particular do you play?
Well, it's a real saw. I mean, it's got the teeth on it and everything. The thing is that...
Well, I mean, it's like a wood saw that you can buy in a hardware store.
Originally it is, but there's a certain, it has to have a certain kind of flexibility, in other words. So if the saw is extremely stiff, really hard to play it. You don't want one that's too short. You really want one that's, I don't even know how long it is. And not quite 3 feet, but more than 20 inches.
Yeah.
You want to get it on out there, and so that flexibility, so it's easier to bend it. So to play the saw requires about 4 different actions to happen. You put it between your legs and secure it. The first thing you do, now this has a handle on it. The one I use, it's kind of a cheater. It's not necessary, but you have to bend the saw into a slight S curve. So you're pushing down with your thumb and pulling up with your index fingers, middle finger. And you've got to get a slight S curve in it. That's how it's going to release the sound. And if you've got the handle, you can kind of push it and pull at the same time without as much effort to get that S curve. Okay, there's your first thing. Then you got to get nervous leg syndrome going with the leg that's underneath the saw. So you've got, let's say, for instance, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to play it, I'm going to bounce my left leg, secure it against my right leg, get the S curve, so that gets that vibrato that makes it interesting, and also makes it easier to find the notes because you can cheat a little bit. Now, here's the hardest part. Finding the sweet spot. The sweet spot is the place where basically you're hitting the octave. So the thing about the saw is it's really like all music. It's mathematics. It's a sine wave. So if you take your bow and you're striking against the flat side of the saw to produce the sound, you have to hit it at the place, it's equivalent of, say, like the 12th fret of a guitar, which is an octave, so you're hitting an open E, put your finger on the 12th fret, and it's the same note an octave higher. So that's the spot you got to find. But as you're playing the notes, you're bending the saw, the more you push it down, the higher the register. The more you pull it back, the lower the register. And so it's like, it'd be like playing the guitar where all your notes, you're only hitting the 12th fret, but you're bending the neck. So that 12th fret keeps moving. So you've got a really narrow, about a 1-inch place on the saw that will produce the sound. So you have to know where that is. So as the more you go down, the more you've got to go up with the bow. The more you come down for a low note, the more you have to move down the saw.
Right.
Because if you don't hit it, you'll get like these weird overtones. So from that point on, it's just bending it up and down for the various notes. But all this has to happen at the same time. So it takes a minute to get all of that technique down.
So overall, including the saw, how many instruments do you play?
Well,
or
at all.
Let's go well and then go at all.
Okay, I would say my number one instrument was my very first one, which is harmonica. That's the only one that I could play with confidence, just sitting in with just about anybody. Even if I don't know the song, I can feel it out with a harmonica. And then after that, I would say it's probably a toss-up between the ukulele, specifically the banjo uke, and the guitar. I'm not much of a lead player. I'm more of a song form-based player, but those primarily. And then from there, I'm serviceable on the mandolin, 4-string banjo, saw. Saw's a lot like the harmonica. I don't really need to even know the song. You just kind of listen. You're just playing by ear, anyway. From that, and then from there, my gosh, I've just got a whole ton of other little things that I play. Auto harp's not that difficult. Let's see, I have various kinds of ukuleles, various kinds of guitar, slide guitar, finger picking guitar. There's probably a whole bunch more I'm not even thinking of. I've even played the mouth bow a little bit and the nose whistle.
Okay. All right.
Most of but the whole thing is that it's all part of that jug band aesthetic, which is very unpretentious. And it's just basically the idea that you can take anything and turn it into an instrument. Oh, I also can play the jug a little bit.
Okay.
Being in a jug band, it's sometimes,
right.
Helpful to be able to actually play a jug.
Right. Especially one that's got 3 X's on the side. Right?
The more that it's emptied, the looser you are in playing it.
Exactly.
Yeah. But the thing about the jug is that people have a lot of misnomers about the jug. They think that it's like a bottle where you're blowing across it.
Yeah.
No, that's not the case. All the jug is a resonator. So what you're doing is going. You're kind of making a spitting sound into the jug, and you're just getting that sound come back. So it just resonates what you're doing with your mouth. So that's the technique of the jug. The jug, just like I said, it's just a big resonator.
So everything we've seen in the cartoons growing up, everything we've seen in the movies, where they're not necessarily making fun of a band, but the washboard, the jug, the whole thing. They're just, like you say, it looks like they're blowing across it.
Well, and if you look at the Darlings, which was most people's relationship with a quote jug band or hillbilly music is off of the Andy Griffith show, The Darlings,
right?
Which was I think it was the Dillards actually, the real band, and you've got the father in that. He was the jug player, and they always showed him blowing across the top of the jug. But that's not how you do it. You have to blow into it, down directly into the hole itself. And, look, I remember I've gone auditioning jugs at antique malls where there might be a dozen of them in there, and you're sitting there playing them all, Because some of them have a really, really kind of nasty, tinny overtone, and some of them have a really warm resonance.
Yeah.
And then you'll get the one that most recently had kerosene in it, and you'll just like get stoned immediately.
Right.
That kerosene coming back in your mouth. You know.
Yeah.
So
I'm
you know,
pass.
yeah, jug. You know, playing jug it's a serious business. So you know, despite all of the stereotypes.
Okay.
And it's you know, and that's the thing about working class music. You know, it's it all comes down to genius and poverty mixed together creates new genres of music. And that's like almost all new music, no matter if it's urban or rural. It comes from poor people with brilliant ideas, just making it up as they go. You know, all the the MCs in the Bronx, you know, figuring out how to scratch records and talk on the mic, and you know, to create hip hop culture in the early '70s. You know, it's never the comfortable that come up with new genres of music. It's always the poor folks with a little time on their hands and some brilliant ideas of how to just do something different.
Okay. All right. Well, and on that note,
Yes, sir.
we will go ahead and polish off these beers, and hopefully I will talk to you again here soon.
All right. I've really enjoyed this, Chris. This has been a lot of fun.
Yes, I enjoy the history and the learning and the sharing of beers, and the fact that you brought this collab in, which was pretty outstanding and
surprisingly good.
Yeah. All right. So until next time, this is Chris Schrum signing off.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Two Beers with the Band podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you would like to donate to the show, the link is in the description. 80% of this month's donation will go to the music charity listed on the 2BWB website, and 20% will go to the upkeep of the show, new equipment, payroll, and rent of the recording locations. Learn more about today's show at 2BWB on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and anywhere you enjoy the show.